Thank you. Woo. Nothing like giving a speech to a couple of thousand people in the morning. Hey, but you are my friends. I can feel it. And hey, following the Wilmington 10 and Reverend Ben Chavis, that's pretty extraordinary. Thank you so much for having me. Really, it is my honor. So actually, I want to start, as I did the Ware lecture, with words of gratitude for you asking me to be here, because I am honored that you see me, honored that you believe that the perspective that I have is one that matters to you. You're probably wondering, well, why would you doubt that you would want to hear from me? I'm a journalist, I'm on TV, I'm on the radio, why doubt? I'm cluing you in to how many Latinos and immigrants feel right about now in these United States of America. We are confused, we are tired, we are sad. We not only feel unloved and unsure of ourselves, we feel targeted. We feel like the pariahs. We are confused about our role in this country. It's not all a downer, okay? And I'll be telling the uplifting stories at the end. But we can't walk away from the fact that that is part of what the sentiment that we carried. So of course, this is a historic week, a confusing week. We are told that this is a time of openness and reform and progress, and yet, beyond what the Supreme Court did this week, recognizing the human rights of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and this is truly the most uplifting thing that our country can move forward on gay marriage, which was the huge boogeyman, and would we have ever thought even 5 years ago that it would be the Supreme Court that would give this permission? So yes, democracy in action. Yes, but, and you know this, how many lives ruined in the process, how many marriages and families destroyed, how many victims of hate crimes. Who would have thought that in our country today, it would be easier to say that you have a gay brother who is married and has adopted kids, or to say that you have a mother who smokes pot and an uncle who is in the marijuana business in Colorado. But to say that you have given safe harbor, that you have given employment to someone who is here without a legal document, someone who is only taking upon themselves the human right, the biblical right to move, to migrate, to be fearless in search of opportunity. No. Would you be prepared to stand on a stage and say, I employ, I give housing to an undocumented person? A prominent feminist in our country, who shall remain nameless, told me that she actually only tries to employ undocumented immigrants because she wants to give them the opportunity to thrive. And so when I told her, oh my God, well, can I interview you? I want to make that public. I mean, that's a big deal, right? The relationship between immigration and feminism and it being a woman's issue. And she said, no, please, don't do that. I would hate to see immigration agents waiting at my apartment door to arrest and deport the people that I employ. This is our America now. There is fear everywhere, fear that a Gestapo is out there for the 11 million people who live, but this is how they feel. They won't go to national parks or sites like the Statue of Liberty, which is a national park site, because the outfits that the national park rangers wear are green, like the color green of the Border Patrol. They walk in fear. They drive in fear. An encounter with the police can only bring anxiety and little relief, so they won't leave their homes for exercise. This is all true. We also know that the other truth is the power of humanity to love and to resist this kind of persecution. And you know this. Your church symbolizes it. Both things happen at once. One of the more uplifting moments, and I don't want to be a downer, so I'll end on a really positive note, but, you know, we have to always talk ourselves up. Because la verdad es que, óyeme, está fuerte allá afuera. It's hard out there, especially after a week like this. But here's an uplifting moment of that resistance, and it actually is a spiritual resistance. And I actually do what I do. When I see this, I give it a national voice, these untold stories. So when I found out that in Spanish Harlem and in cities and towns and villages across our country, where these undocumented immigrants and their family and friends who may have documents, have a kind of spiritual resistance. And so I don't know how many of you know about the 12 days prior to Christmas that in Mexico we celebrate the Posadas, which is the reenactment of Joseph and Mary looking for a place to give birth, homeless, undocumented, looking for a place to give birth to Jesus. Well, this is a big tradition in Mexico, Las Posadas. And it really is like public theater. People reenact this, they sing, it's all done in public. That's when the piñatas are broken, once Joseph and Mary are led into the house. It's a really joyous event, and I remember it greatly as a kid in Mexico. Well, now, those posadas are happening in places like Spanish Harlem, in tenement apartment buildings, where instead of being out on the street or in gardens or in public markets in Mexico, people are cramming into fifth-floor walk-ups and doing the same thing that they would be doing in their small towns and villages, asking for posada. That is a kind of resistance. It is in the face of, you want us to be invisible. It is saying we are visible and we will not forget who we are. Much more than that, we want to share it with who you are. Or there is the hopefulness, the fearlessness of the dreamers. Even though they are the face of the new civil rights movement, but they're not looked at it through that lens, in my perception, because of the lack of sophistication by much of the executive level of the mainstream news media. And yes, the power of culture to cross borders, musicians, artists. So yes, there is amazing hope. But we have American citizen children and teens who are growing up with these images of law enforcement authority as something, someone they should fear. How can that be possibly good for any of us? To be raising a generation of young people that look towards our law enforcement authorities as institutions that are dividers of family and that bring fear and not help. So, back to the Supreme Court. Yes, the downside was striking down a key element of the Voting Rights Act in states where now one of the fastest growing populations is not black, but brown in the South. So where voter discrimination now will be about show us your citizenship papers, a new kind of sinister anti-democratic vein in our country. And at the same time that is happening, we hear so-called exciting news about the Senate passing its version of an immigration bill where citizenship might be attainable realistically maybe in like 15 years, if not more. So I tweeted, I said, you know, I really wish I could be more excited, but I'm a little jaded. And I'm not so sure that people understand that the deportations will continue, if not intensify. So why this excitement about the Senate when we know that the House has already said, we're not even going to look at that version? So yes, we are all confused about what this means. It's the worst kind of U.S. mambo. That's what I call this drama of our country now. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, but actually in this case, I think it would actually be 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. The bigger issue, the meta message that we're getting from Congress is, well, we really need your votes, but will you just be invisible? We really understand that you represent the future of this country, but will you just leave and be quiet? Just not ask for anything? Why are you Latinos who represent the broad immigrant rights movement in this country, why are you Latinos so pushy? See, what is happening in our America today is the fact that what you want to see, what you want to hear, the fact that you want to make the invisible visible, that is also happening in America today. You are the 3 steps forward, and for that, thank you. In my life, it's to you. The applause are for you. Thank you. I thank you. In my life, my core as a journalist has been making the invisible visible. It is what moves me. I was born in Mexico City. I was raised on the south side of Chicago in the 1960s and 70s. My story was invisible from the mainstream media. We were not a poor immigrant family. We came from Mexico because my father got a job at the University of Chicago to be a medical doctor dedicated to researching the inner ear, and his career was dedicated in part to helping create the cochlear implant. With all respect to my friends from the deaf community. When I told my father, I said, "Papi, you know, there are some people who are deaf who don't want the cochlear implant," he was just shocked. He was like, "What are you talking about?" So it was interesting to have that generational conversation with my own father. But the fact is that when I was growing up in this country, my story was invisible. And yet, because I was crossing borders at all times, going to and from Pilsen in Chicago, where I was being raised, which was the Mexicano community, there is where I saw the invisibility. And you know, that invisibility has consequences, especially when it comes to the media. So, yeah, why would I have ever thought that I could become a journalist? I didn't. I never did. It was only because of one college counselor who said, "You know, you really should try and get that internship at NPR." That I said, "You think I'm good enough? Really? Because there's no one out there who looks like me, sounds like me, thinks like me, talks like me. Why should I do this?" Do it. Thankfully, proud Barnard woman, she pushed me in that direction. So, that's for Barnard. So I do have this honor and duty to see these things and then share them. Look, the truth is that, well, look, my husband says to me, "You know, Maria, you find the saddest countries and communities, the most far away, forgotten places, and there, inside those places, you go and you find the saddest, most disenfranchised people, and that's who you go and tell the stories of." And I'm like, yes, that is what I do. The truth is, for my family, it is really difficult and painful because I don't want to be sad all the time. But I have this mission, like you, to give voice to the voiceless and to make visible the invisible. So, I'm going to take a few minutes now and describe the things that I see in the hopes that I'm bringing my world closer to your world. And I know that some of you who are very active in the immigration rights movement know this, so bear with me. But for those of you who don't, this is an America that you must know. So this is how it manifests. You're at your house, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and you hear banging on the door. When we were shooting this for our Frontline documentary, Lost in Detention, we were told that we were going to witness the rounding up of some very dangerous immigrant criminals, because that is the narrative that you have been fed by the mainstream media, that has been fed by the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration Customs Enforcement, which is that these are terribly dangerous immigrant criminals who are not only undocumented, but they are criminals. And so in the lead up, to this, we were departing at 4 o'clock in the morning. They were like, you guys are going to need to stay back with your cameras. And who knows, because you never know what's going to happen with these dangerous immigrant, criminal, illegal aliens. So, we got a little bit concerned and we're wondering about our own plan of action were something to happen. But, 6 o'clock in the morning in East Los Angeles, just about an hour and a half from here, the roosters were crowing in the backyards of this predominantly Mexican-American barrio. In the humble but manicured lawns, there were statues of the Virgen of Guadalupe and Jesus Christ, adorned with Christmas lights, even though it was the month of March. We witnessed the knock on the door. It wasn't a knock. It was like that. The agents didn't specify who they were or what they were looking for. They didn't say that they had a warrant. What these heavily armed men dressed in black did have were uniforms that said police everywhere. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're groggy, you open the door, 9 men with police, and they say, you know what, can we come inside? We'd rather not disturb your neighbors. We need to talk about something with you. And at that point, because actually in the Latino community, law enforcement should be treated like authority with respect. So we open the door. Pásale, oficial, pásale. Venga, hospitality. They weren't informed that at that moment, when they open their doors, those not police, but immigration agents can then ask anyone in the home for their documentation, and therefore can increase the number of deportations. When they came to get 1, they took 10. How would you like it if you were awakened at 6 a.m. and a tax agent comes to your door, but instead of wearing a uniform that says tax agent, he's wearing a uniform that says police? Or if child welfare came to your home on a failure to pay alimony, but instead of identifying themselves as that, instead they were wearing uniforms that said police. And then you let these people in without being told, in fact, that you had a right not to let them in. How would you feel as an American if this happened to you or to one of your children? You see, the fact is that it is illegal in our country to misrepresent a law enforcement agency. It is illegal, and yet it happens every single day of the week, excluding Saturday and Sunday. It is happening right now. So, are we safer because that man who was 55 years old, I'm sorry, I forgot to describe the person who they came to get. He wasn't a gangbanger. He was a 60-year-old gardener who had, I think at one point had a DUI, or who had a traffic accident. The gardener, the hardened criminal, arrested, handcuffed, with the statue, the poster of the Virgen de Guadalupe lit up right behind him. Are we safer because he's been deported, leaving American-born grandchildren behind? What does it matter anyway? Just a couple of illegals. Who cares what happens to them? They're not me. I'm not them. They're not my family. They're not citizens. Anyway, they're criminals. And they're lesser than me, different than me. The problem is that they are not. And these people who are living it, as I say, en carne propia, they are living the suffering, the detention, the deportation, the family divided. But what we're all living are the consequences of those kinds of basic violations of due process. And that's where it goes beyond the human rights of those immigrants. Unfortunately, desafortunadamente, they will live with that. But us, we have the power to speak up and say, wait a second, this does not represent our Constitution, our beliefs, our human rights, our civil rights. No, this does not represent us as a country. This is not who we are. And only you can say that. Only you can say that without fear. And we honor those people who, at the possibility of losing everything, still go out and protest the face of the civil rights movement. The people who without documents go and protest. They are the new face of the civil rights movement. So, when these men and women are detained, here's another thing that you need to know. There is a completely separate system of laws that applies to you when you are an immigrant. Because this is civil immigration law, they don't have access to a lawyer who can help them to understand why they were just arrested and detained, what's going to happen with their case. You know that in this country, between no more than 48 hours can pass before you are let go or processed or given a lawyer. This does not exist for our immigrant brothers and sisters, and the only difference is the fact that they were not born in this country. So for me, having been born in Mexico, even though I'm an American citizen, when I engage with law enforcement, and look, the truth is that we all know an arrest can happen at any time. We live in a police state. And so, at any time, any of us know that it could happen. And for me, the question will be, because all of us now, another way in which our entire system has been impacted by what's happening with immigration, is that now when you're arrested, you will be asked, where were you born? I'm sorry, since when does that matter in our country of immigrants? That is a key question. And by the way, for those of you who travel, I don't know, I just got back from Canada a month or so ago, and when I was returning into the United States, that was the question that was asked, where were you born? And I was like, I've never been asked that question before in a re-entry. What is that about? It's this litmus test that is out there and silent. Where were you born? As if somehow you not being born in this country makes you less than. It's the way in which these changes creep into our America unless you speak up and say no and question this. So, why does this matter to us? This is an issue of due process in constitutional and constitutional rights. When these kinds of extra-legal actions are taken, of agents showing up, misrepresenting who they are, that matters to all of us. Now, when you're taken and processed, like these men who we witnessed in Los Angeles, and you're taken into a sub-basement of an undescript building far away, or in some cases, hidden in plain sight in our cities, you're never asked in that intake process by immigration agents, you're never asked, or at least in all of the reporting that I did, no one said that they had been asked by these agents if they had American citizen children. It is not a required question in the protocol of intake of the detention of immigrants. Why does that matter? Because when the Obama administration says the Department of Homeland Security is not in the business of deporting parents of American citizen children, there is no legal protocol to guarantee that. Therefore, it is only words. Nice words. But the problem is the system that has been created now, basically what they said to us, the immigration agents on the ground said, oh yeah, we hear what they're saying in Washington. Yeah, that's what happens. This too shall pass. We just know that as immigration agents, it is our job to detain and deport as many people as we possibly can because there are 11 million illegal aliens and they should all be rounded up. So, the fact is that they are deporting parents of American citizen children. They're deporting parents of children, period. I don't care if they're American citizen children or undocumented children. They are deporting the parents of children in our country, in our United States of family values. The government, our government, in our name and with our tax dollars is dividing families. It is heartbreaking. And yes, these families live it en carne propia, with their own skin. But what does it do for the rest of us that this is happening on our dime, in our time, with our money? And what are we saying? What are you saying? Then coercion occurs. Because once you're taken in and you're not explained exactly what's going on and your due process now has been violated I don't know how many times, then, as it was just reported, and the ACLU has made this public, coercion occurs. The immigrants are again like canaries. They force them to sign their own deportations. That's as if, again, your own son or daughter who is detained by people coming to her home at 4 o'clock in the morning is then told to sign a paper to make it better, and in fact, the paper makes it worse. You see, we have to share these stories so that you share these stories. You go back into your communities, you open up the dialogue, you find the immigrant rights groups that are doing grassroots work in your communities, and you start the conversation. Because when the Jews were being rounded up, who exactly was telling the story of how it was happening? When the Japanese Americans were being rounded up, who exactly was telling the stories of just what that looked like? There is shame involved, mis queridos amigos. It is not like you want to call up and say, oh, by the way, my father was just deported. This is embarrassing stuff. We are made to feel ashamed of who we are. And then when they come and they divide our families, we're ashamed of telling the stories of what's happening. Do you want to go and tell your teacher, my mom and dad were deported last night? Do you want to go into your workplace and say, I can't come to work because my grandmother was deported? There is real shame here, mis queridos amigos. There is shame and there is silence. So on the one hand, this U.S. mambo, Latinos are being celebrated. $1 trillion market, woo! And Ricky Martin can sing, woo! But really, there is shame and silence, and that is breeding depression and self-hatred and an identity crisis for the fastest growing demographic in our country. How can that possibly be good? An aside. Latina teenagers have the highest rate of attempted suicide in our country. Latina teens who should be at their prime celebrating their quinceañeras have the highest rate of attempted suicide. So yes, it is confusing. And that, because we're human, it becomes internalized. Of course. It becomes internalized when you know the conditions that your mother or father are being held in, the conditions that I saw. People being housed in what is basically a circus tent, no windows. And where there were 2 windows at opposite ends of this circus tent, there was a red tape circling out the window so that you couldn't get right up close to the window. And if you crossed that red line, you would be called on by a guard. Because you're an immigrant criminal. And therefore, who says you have the right to see sunlight? That's happening in our country today. What did I see? I saw a complaint box. Even when they knew that we were coming with our cameras, and they knew what tent they were going to take us into, we shot footage of a complaint box that was nailed shut. how are you supposed to complain? There was no clean drinking water. Imagine every time that you're thirsty, and this is in the South Texas Valley, right along the border. You're thirsty and you have to go ask the guard for a cup to go get water. There was no TV, no books. Sometimes they'd run out of toilet paper. When we were there, we were told that we were not allowed to speak to any of the detainees. So, which is, I don't know, free speech? We were told, frankly, threatened, if you speak to any of the detainees while you're on tour here at Willacy, we'll escort you right out of the building. So, we spoke to people who had been inside. We spoke to a woman named Maria who grew up in Austin, Texas, and didn't know that she was undocumented because she just didn't know. Her mom had always told her that she had a green card. She told us that they were so bored that the rats that would come out at night had names. They would run out of toilet paper. They would give women one pad when they were on their period. If they had to plead for more, there was nothing they would do. She said that when they smelled food cooking, that they knew that outside human rights monitors were coming. Because apart from that, they never received cooked food. They were hungry most of the time. And she was sexually assaulted at night by a female guard. And then she was deported by mistake. They took her, dumped her on the other side of the border, and when her lawyer found out, got back in touch, and they said, oops, it was a mistake, and they had to go back and get her to bring her back. These kinds of realities exist in our United States because many of these immigrants are being held in detention centers that are privately run. And so in our democracy where fairness and where we complain when our US citizens are being housed in bad conditions around the world, well, those kinds of conditions happen here, where people who have committed no crime are held in solitary confinement, not for days, but for weeks, and in some cases months, and in some cases simply because they're gay. They're fed food that has expired, with expired dates, because that is a way in which a private prison industry can scrimp and save money and make more of a profit. Yes, that's right. We live in a country, the world's greatest democracy, where you make a profit out of keeping someone in a bed in a cell. That is our reality.